Good afternoon. This is Coach Socrates here, and I've been a Phillies fan since the late 1970s, and I've always enjoyed watching the Phillies. They've broken my heart quite a few years, and if you think about it, this year has been a great run since May when the Phillies were 21-29 and they were being managed by Joe Girardi, and we weren't really getting the job done. We weren't meshing as a team. But when Rob Thompson took over, things changed for the better. And I mean, if you had told me in late May that we would be going to the Game 6 of the World Series and losing, I think I would take that. I mean, it's a tough pill to swallow, especially the day after losing the World Series to Houston. But I mean, I think even the most loyal Phillies fan as myself, even the most loyal Phillies fans as myself, we have to admit that we lost to a better team. Houston got timely pitching. They got good hitting from all the way up and down the lineup, and I really can't question many moves that Rob Thompson made. But I think, in retrospect, even if Rob Thompson had left Wheeler in the game for a little bit longer, who knows? Maybe that one run lead would have stood up. Maybe it wouldn't have. But when you bring Jose Alvarado in, and he's a flamethrower and throws a 99-yard fastball over the heart of the plate to Jordan Alvarez, it's gonna go a long way, and it went 450 yards. And I mean, that was a 3-run home run to give the Astros a 3-1 lead in the game, and they ended up winning the game 4-1. But in retrospect, I can't be disappointed. Last 3 games of the series, I mean, let's face it, Game 4, the Phillies got no hit. Game 5, they lost 3-2, but I thought Houston had them pretty much under control. In Game 5, I mean, it was a 1-0 lead for the Phillies until Alvarez went deep and made it 3-1 to be a final score of 4-1. So I can't be disappointed in that. I mean, I'm sad we didn't win the series, but I mean, let's face it. I've been a Phillies fan since the late 70s, and in my lifetime, the Phillies have gone to the World Series 6 times, and they've won it twice. When I was a little kid in 1980, they won it in 6 games over the Royals, and in 2008 they defeated Tampa Bay in 5 games. But if you think about it, I mean, that's two championships. That's one more championship than the Cubs have won in 114 years. So I can't be but disappointed. I mean, we've been to the World Series 6 times in 42 years, and let's face it, the Indians have only been to 2 since 1954. So I can't be but so mad about that. But I'm happy. I mean, I'm happy knowing that the Phillies have won their 8th pennant in history, and I can't be too ticked off. I mean, there have been many great moments. I mean, Bryce Harper had his moment when he hit the home run to send the Phillies to the World Series. Reese Hoskins hit a home run to get the Phillies off the deck against the Braves. So I mean, it's a great run. I mean, the Phillies knocked off Pujols and Molina on the road 2 games in a row to knock out the Cardinals. So we knocked out 2 probable Hall of Famers there. Atlanta's going to be in the thick of things for at least the rest of the decade, because they've got a whole bunch of young talent, and they're going to be really good, and they're probably going to be the kings of the National League East for a long time, along with the Mets. And I mean, the Phillies didn't have to play the Dodgers in the NLCS; they played the Padres, and that was a good series. I mean, the Phillies won in 5, and Then in the World Series, you play against a team that a lot of people thought cheated in 2017, and maybe they did. But this is a legit championship that they won this year. I mean, they are a legit dynasty, and they deserve to be considered a dynasty. I think they're the best team in the American League, and I think the Phillies knocked out some good teams on the way to the World Series. I can't be disappointed in that. Now, moving ahead, I mean, Bryce Harper would have been nice to have won a championship this year for him. I mean, he did his job. He earned the money this year. Last year, he was the National League MVP for the whole season, and this year, when the Phillies made it to the postseason, he shined up until the very end of the World Series. The last 3 games, he had I believe he had 3 hits, and they were really inconsequential. He had a double, but that was about it in the last 3 games. I mean, in Game 4, you can't help but do so much when you get no hit. So, but the thing is, being a Phillies fan, I've learned a long time ago that you have to accept the good and the bad. Wasn't it what didn't Deadpool say that life is a series of tragedies that is sometimes broken up by moments of great joy? Well, that's the life of a Phillies fan, because as many times as they've won championships, I mean, being a fan since 1978, that's 44 years, and they've won 6 pennants. But other than that, in many of those other 38 years, they haven't really been very successful. I mean, you've had a few seasons where they were lucky to win 63, 68, 70 games. I mean, a lot of times they finished dead last in the National League East, and many times they were out of the race by the All-Star break. But we've been fortunate that we've had a few good teams. We've had a few good teams. I mean, we've had some talented players, and we've had some good general managers. But a lot of people ask me what I think this next year is going to be in 2023, and I just think that the Phillies, I mean, they should be in the thick of things if they add a few things. I mean, Trey Turner's on the market, or he's a free agent, so he'll be on the market. Are they going to re-sign Aaron Nola? That's a question you really need to think about. The Phillies need to think about. I mean, Rhys Hoskins. A lot of people think Rhys Hoskins is going to be on the market, maybe to be traded. Nick Castellanos was a big free agent pickup, but in the end, he really didn't do much. He struck out a whole bunch during the regular season, and I think if you asked him, he did not have a very good year as well. I mean, he made some great plays in the playoffs. One good catch against he had a great catch against the Padres to save one game, and he saved Game 3 against the Braves, or rather Game 1 against the Braves to save a 7-6 win over Atlanta. So he's always been known as a liability with the glove. He's more of an all hit, no field guy. Well, he made probably the 2 biggest fielding plays for the Phillies all year. So I am not like a lot of Phillies fans who think that he was a failure, complete failure this year. I think that he had his moments of failure, but he also had some great hits and some great fielding plays. I mean, that's what the playoffs are all about. Guys who step up in the postseason that you wouldn't expect to do it in the postseason. I mean, he didn't have a very good regular season, but his postseason was great. I mean, who would have thought going into the year that a rookie would be the American League Championship Series MVP as well as the World Series? I mean, that's what baseball is all about. The best team does not always make the World Series. I mean, the Phillies made it to the World Series with 87 wins. The National League had 3 teams that won over 100 games, and none of them made it to the championship series. So, and that's the baseball is the great sport when it comes to being equalized. Hockey and baseball are like that. Basketball, more than likely, you're going to have the number 1 or number 2 seed in the conference that would make it to the finals. Football, more than likely, your number 1 seed or number 2 seed will make the Super Bowl. Baseball, baseball and hockey, where you can possibly have a 6, 7, or 8 seed even make the championship series, the Stanley Cup Finals, or the World Series. There are a lot of the so-called experts who think the Phillies didn't belong in the playoffs with 87 wins. Well, the Phillies took the system that was given to them, having 3 wild cards with 3 division winners. They were the last team in, and they took care of business on the road in St. Louis. They won the game they had to win in San Diego and won the 3 at home against the Padres. They won the 1 they had to win against the Braves, and then they won the 2 games at home. I mean, you can't. You gotta go with the system that's put in front of you. They ran up. I mean, they won the first game against the Astros in Houston, and they won game 3 at home to go up 2-1, and they had 2 more games at home to finish off the World Series, and they just couldn't do it. They get no hit in game 4, and game 5 they lose 3-2, and they had to go back on the road and lose 4-1 last night. So I can't be disappointed in that. But Bird is the situation is such with the Phillies that I think, being a fan, I'm always going to be disappointed at the end of the season. But when you lose the way the Phillies did last night, I can't be but so disappointed because I think for the first time in a while, I think they lost to a better team in the postseason. In 2009, the Yankees won in 6 games, but I never really truly considered the Yankees to be the better team. They had Jeter, and A-Rod had a good postseason that year, but I didn't really think that the Yankees, top to bottom, were better than the Phillies were. And maybe that's bias on my part that I followed the Phillies for that entire era. But I think the Phillies. I still think even 13 years later, I don't think the Yankees were better than the Phillies. 1993, Joe Carter hits the home run in Game 6 of the World Series that beats the Phillies, and with Mitch Williams threw the pitch, and Joe Carter took it deep to left field in Sky Dome, and Toronto had the top 3 hitters in the American League that year, but I know the Phillies probably shouldn't have been in the World Series, but they beat a team that won 105 games in Atlanta. So, that, like I said earlier, the best teams don't always make it to the World Series. The team that's hottest at that moment generally makes it. And that Phillies team with Dykstra and Kruk and Darren Daulton and Tommy Green and Terry Mulholland and Mitch Williams. The Phillies were catching fire at the right time. We were consistent the whole season. 83, we were an old team. We lost to Baltimore. Cal Ripken was, I believe, in his 2nd year. Eddie Murray was a future Hall of Famer. Was at first base on that team. And you still had some relatively good pitching for the Orioles that had just been in the World Series 4 years previous to that when they lost to the Pirates in 7 games. But baseball is truly the great equalizer, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the Phillies are the favorites to go back to the World Series next year. I think the Phillies are in the mix. I think talent-wise, if they can add a starting pitcher and maybe get a legit closer, I think they'll be right in the mix to make the playoffs. If they keep the same format of 6 playoff teams in each league, I think the Phillies could get one of those 3 wild card spots. I don't think we're talented enough to beat Atlanta and New York over the course of 162 games to win the division, but I think the Phillies are good enough to make the postseason if they can just be consistent. This year you go from 21-29 in May to making it to the playoffs in the last weekend of the season. That's not going to happen very often because Milwaukee, and I think even the Phillies admit this, Milwaukee had a terrible August and September and early October, and that's what cost them getting into the playoffs. If Milwaukee had had any kind of August or September, there's a good chance Milwaukee and not the Phillies would have made the postseason. But once you make the postseason, it's a 12 team tournament, and anybody can make it. The number one seed in the American League made it in Houston, and the Phillies as the sixth seed, they made it to the World Series out of the National League. I mean, some so-called experts want to say that the best team should always make the World Series. Well, it's not. That's not the way that baseball has decided to do it since 1969. Up until 1968, the team that won over the course of 154 or 162 games went to the World Series automatically. And this year, you would have had Houston and the Dodgers. And I'm not saying that would not have been a great World Series, but let's face it. Over the course of the season, especially in August and September, Houston and the Dodgers were pretty much locked into finishing as top seeds in their leagues. And let's face it, there would not have been much interest in baseball outside of those two cities. You wouldn't have had the interest in Atlanta or New York. In terms of the Mets, Atlanta would win 100 games. The Mets would win 100 games, but there would have been no real division race to determine seeding. And with an 87 and 75 record, the Phillies would have had. I mean, sports fan in Philadelphia would have turned its attention to the Eagles probably in late July or early August. If I'm being charitable, but with 6 playoff teams in each league, the Phillies were in a pennant race up until early October when they clinched it. So you had a bunch, and once the Phillies made the playoffs, you saw a situation where where you had interest. I mean, you had Citizens Bank Ballpark against Atlanta, the Padres, and Houston. If you watched the games, you realized how crazy and how intense the fans were in their love for the Phillies. But in retrospect, if you think about it, you don't have a situation many times where, the best team does not always make the World Series. I think LA may have been the best team over the course of 162 games, but they didn't prove it in the 4 or 5 game series that they had with the Padres. The Padres beat them 3-1. That's not a fluke. San Diego was playing well at the end of the season. Now, some people will say that that there was rust involved. I mean, Atlanta and the Yankees and Houston had byes in the first round of the playoffs, and LA and Atlanta had byes in the first round of the playoffs. Now, some people will say that that's too much time, that it allowed the Phillies and the to beat the Braves because the Braves were rusty. Maybe that's the case. But, I can come back and say Houston had the same amount of time off, and yet they didn't miss. They swept their way to the World Series. I mean, they only lost 2 games in the postseason. They were 11-2 in the playoffs. The only 2 games they lost were the 2 games they lost in Game 1 and Game 3 against the Phillies. I mean, they were 7-0 in the American League playoffs. So anybody who says that the rust factor cost Atlanta and teams like that, Atlanta in the postseason, I mean, you got to think about Houston had the same advantage of having that week off, and they ended up. I mean, Houston ended up had no problems with it. So, I mean, the Phillies just got hot at the right time. I mean, they beat the Cardinals, they beat the Braves, and they beat the Padres to get to the World Series, and you gain more momentum as you get farther along. But the thing is, the thing is, a lot of people want to talk about. A lot of people think that, I've talked to a lot of Phillies fans, and Phillies fans, I mean, they're ticked off, they're angry, they're pretty sad that we lost, and I can understand that feeling. But the thing is, in retrospect, you're going to understand. I mean, you learn as a fan that there's still going to be a very beautiful banner that's going to hang out there, a flag that's going to hang out there in the outfield that's going to say 2022 on it. I mean, the Phillies won the National League pennant. The Dodgers can't say that, and they won 100, and I want to say 100 and I want to say 109, 113, 114 games. The Yankees won 99 or 100 games. The Braves won 101. The Mets won 100 games. The Braves are going to have their National League East championship banner. But I tell you what, they would trade every one of those 101 wins to have what the Phillies have. They won 87 games, but the Phillies are going to have the National League pennant, and they're going to have the National League championship flag flying over Citizens Bank Park for the next season. And that's the great thing about it. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of them. I'm proud of the Phillies. I mean, I know that it would have been nice to have won 2 more games and been world champions, but some things just aren't meant to be. And when you lose to a better team, you don't feel as angry about it as if you had gotten to where you were and then you end up losing. And that's the way it is in any level, whether it's high school, college, or professionally. I mean, the best teams, they have to bring it every night. And if they don't bring it that on a certain night, they're going to lose. And I mean, that's the great thing about sports. I mean, you can be undefeated, and on one given night, your season can be taken from you. And that's the way you got to look at it. But those are my views from being a Phillies fan, and this is Coach Socrates signing off.